The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Claire was in the bath. The water had gone lukewarm, but she hadn't noticed. She was staring at the ceiling, at a crack in the plaster that ran from the light fixture to the corner, like a river on a map. For the first time in 11 years, that crack looked beautiful. It looked like freedom. The phone kept ringing. She let it. Her phone was on the counter, screen glowing in the dim bathroom light. She could see the name without reaching for it. Rachel, her sister. Claire closed her eyes. The ringing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should have. She'd made the last payment that morning. 11 years, 132 months, 4,015 days. The number was burned into her memory the way some people remember birthdays or anniversaries. She remembered the exact amount too, $47,862. With interest, fees, and penalties, it had become $71,409 over the years. Every cent of it paid. Every single cent. The water was cold now. Claire got out, wrapped herself in a towel that was thin from too many washes, and looked at herself in the mirror. She was 43 years old. She looked older. The lines around her eyes were deep. Her hair, which had been dark brown when the debt started, was streaked with gray. She'd earned every one of those gray hairs. The phone rang again. Rachel! Again! Claire picked it up this time. She shouldn't have. Her sister's voice was shaking. Claire, I need you. It's bad. It's really bad. The words came fast, tumbling over each other, desperate and raw. Claire stood in her bathroom, water dripping from her hair onto the tile floor, and listened as her sister explained that she was in trouble. Financial trouble. Legal trouble. The kind of trouble that didn't just go away. How much? Claire asked. Her voice was flat. She already knew this conversation. She'd had it before in different forms, with different people. How much always came before please help me. And I don't know what to do, and you're the only one I can ask. Rachel was crying now. It's not about money, she said. It's worse than that. Claire, they're saying I owe $230,000. For a loan I didn't even take out. For a business that wasn't even mine. Claire, they're saying you're responsible too. The floor seemed to tilt. Claire sat down on the edge of the tub, her wet skin sticking to the cold porcelain. What are you talking about? She said. But even as she said it, something cold and ancient was waking up in her memory. Something she'd signed. Something she'd forgotten. Something from before. Do you remember? Rachel said. Her voice small now, almost childlike. Do you remember when Mom and Dad needed help with the restaurant? Back in 2009? Do you remember what we signed? Claire remembered. She remembered a kitchen table covered in papers. She remembered her father's hands shaking as he pointed to the signature lines. She remembered him saying it was just a formality, just a backup, just in case. She remembered being 29 years old and thinking that helping your parents was what you did. She remembered signing her name. She remembered her sister signing next to her. The restaurant had failed within 18 months. Her parents had declared bankruptcy. The debt had been discharged. Everyone had moved on. That was 14 years ago. Ancient history. Except it wasn't. Rachel was still talking. They're saying the loan was restructured. They're saying it was transferred to a different entity. They're saying the personal guarantees are still valid. Claire, they're saying we're both liable. Jointly and severally. That's what the letter says. Jointly and severally liable for the full amount. Claire had just finished paying off her own debt. She'd just made the last payment that morning. She'd spent 11 years clawing her way out of a hole that had started with a medical emergency and a job loss and a series of choices that had seemed reasonable at the time. She'd worked 3 jobs. She'd lived in a studio apartment with no heat. She'd eaten rice and beans for dinner 5 nights a week. She'd said no to vacations, to new clothes, to nights out with friends, to everything that made life feel like living instead of just surviving. And now, 9 hours after making that final payment, after breathing free air for the first time in over a decade, her sister was telling her that she owed $230,000 for a debt she thought had died 14 years ago. Claire was born in Portland, Oregon in 1981. She was the older sister by 4 years. Responsible was the word people used to describe her, even when she was young. Responsible Claire. Dependable Claire. Claire who always did her homework, who always showed up on time, who always helped out when someone needed something. She'd been a nurse for 17 years. Emergency room, night shifts mostly. She liked the night shifts. They paid more, and there were fewer administrators wandering around. It was just her and the other night nurses, and the patients who came in bleeding or broken or dying. She was good at her job, calm in crisis, steady hands, the kind of person you wanted around when things went wrong. Her apartment was small, but it was hers. 1 bedroom in a complex on the east side of town, near the highway. She could hear the traffic at night, but she'd learned to find it soothing, that constant hum of people going somewhere. She had a cat named Tuesday. She'd found him on a Tuesday, shivering behind a dumpster at the hospital, and the name had stuck. He was orange and fat, and the only living thing she'd allowed herself to love completely during the 11 years of paying off the debt. Every morning, after her night shift, she'd come home and make coffee in the same chipped mug she'd had since college. She'd sit on her couch, which was also from college, and she'd open her laptop and look at the number, the amount she still owed. She'd watch it go down, slowly, painfully slowly, but down nonetheless. Every 2 weeks, another payment, another small victory, another step toward the finish line. She didn't date, she didn't have time, and she didn't have money, and she didn't have the emotional energy to explain to someone why she lived the way she lived. Her friends from nursing school had mostly drifted away. They'd gotten married, had kids, bought houses in the suburbs. They'd moved on with their lives while Claire stayed frozen in place, treading water, trying not to drown. But she'd done it. After 11 years, she'd done it. The debt was gone. And that morning, before her shift, she'd allowed herself to think about what came next. Maybe she'd take a vacation. Maybe she'd go to the coast, rent a cabin, spend a week doing nothing but reading and walking on the beach. Maybe she'd start dating again. Maybe she'd buy a new couch. Maybe she'd start saving for a house. Maybe her life could finally begin. She'd felt light that morning. Actually light. Like something heavy had been removed from her chest and she could breathe fully for the first time in years. She'd smiled at patients. She'd laughed at a joke one of the other nurses made. She'd felt almost giddy. And then her sister called. The letter had arrived at Rachel's house 3 days earlier, but Rachel had been too scared to open it. She'd known it was bad from the return address, Callinger and Associates, a debt collection law firm based in Delaware. The kind of firm that bought old debts for pennies on the dollar and then pursued them aggressively, legally, relentlessly. When Rachel finally opened it, the words didn't make sense at first. She'd read it 3 times before the reality settled in. The loan from 2009, the restaurant loan, the one their parents had taken out to save the failing business, the one that had been wrapped up in the bankruptcy. Except it hadn't been. Not all of it. The letter explained, in cold legal language, that the original loan had been issued by Mountain View Regional Bank. When Mountain View Regional Bank failed in 2011, its assets were purchased by Consolidated Financial Group. Consolidated Financial Group had restructured the loan, transferring it to a separate legal entity called CFG Recovery Trust. CFG Recovery Trust was not bound by the bankruptcy discharge because it had not been a party to the original bankruptcy proceedings. The personal guarantees signed by Rachel Morrison and Claire Morrison in March 2009 remained in full force and effect. Claire read the letter on her phone while sitting on the edge of her bathtub, water from her hair dripping onto the screen. The language was dense, deliberately confusing, full of whereas and heretofore, and in accordance with. But the meaning was clear. She owed money, a lot of money, for a debt she thought had been erased. The amount was staggering. The original loan had been for $85,000. With 14 years of accumulated interest, late fees, legal fees, and penalties, it had grown to $234,712. And because Claire and Rachel had signed as joint guarantors, They were jointly and severally liable. That meant the collection firm could pursue either one of them or both of them for the full amount. Claire had $1,900 in her checking account. That was it. That was everything. 11 years of sacrifice. And she'd managed to save $1,900. She had no assets, no house, no car worth more than $3,000, no retirement account. She'd liquidated everything years ago to pay off the first debt. She called the number on the letter the next morning. A woman answered, professional, polite, unmoved by emotion. She confirmed the amount. She confirmed the liability. She explained the payment options. They could set up a payment plan, 60 months, maybe 72 if the credit check came back acceptable. The monthly payment would be approximately $4,200. Claire made $3,100 a month after taxes. Even working overtime, even picking up every extra shift available, she couldn't make $4,200 a month. It was mathematically impossible. Could she negotiate? Pay less? The woman's voice remained pleasant. The debt had already been reduced, she explained. The original amount owed, with all accrued interest and fees, was actually $307,000. Out of goodwill, and in recognition of the age of the debt, Callinger and Associates was offering a settlement amount of $234,712. This was, the woman emphasized, a very generous offer. What if she couldn't pay? There was a pause. Then the woman explained, still pleasant, still professional, that failure to pay would result in legal action, wage garnishment, bank account seizure, liens on any property. They would pursue all legal remedies available. And because this was a joint liability, they would pursue both sisters simultaneously. Whatever one sister couldn't pay, the other would owe. It was, the woman said, like a chain, unbreakable. Claire had spent 23 years in emergency rooms. She'd seen people die. She'd held the hand of a 16-year-old kid bleeding out from a gunshot wound while his mother screamed in the hallway. She'd pronounced a young mother dead after a car accident while the woman's 2 children waited in the lobby. She'd seen suffering, real suffering, physical and immediate and undeniable. But this was different. This was a different kind of death, slower, more complete. This was being buried alive, slowly, one shovelful at a time, while everyone around you went about their normal day. The mechanism that had ensnared Claire and Rachel was not unique. It was part of a larger, mostly invisible system that had been operating in American finance since the 1980s, but had accelerated dramatically after the 2008 financial crisis, when banks failed or were acquired. Their loan portfolios were often sold, not to other banks, but to specialized entities, asset recovery firms, debt buyers, legal trusts designed specifically to exist outside the normal rules of bankruptcy and debt discharge. These entities would purchase old debts for a fraction of their face value, sometimes as little as 3 or 4 cents on the dollar, and then pursue them aggressively. The genius of the system, from the perspective of the debt buyers, was in the fine print. Personal guarantees, especially those signed before 2010, often included provisions that survived bankruptcy. Joint and several liability meant that the debt didn't die, even if one party was released from it. Restructuring clauses allowed loans to be transferred to new entities that weren't bound by previous legal settlements. And statute of limitations laws varied by state, with some states allowing debt collection actions for up to 15 or even 20 years. In the decade following the 2008 crisis, an entire industry had emerged around buying and pursuing old debts. Companies like Callinger and Associates specialized in it. They employed teams of lawyers who understood the loopholes, the technicalities, the gaps in state and federal law that allowed them to resurrect debts that most people assumed were long dead. The practice was legal, completely legal, morally questionable perhaps, but legal, and it was lucrative. A firm could buy a portfolio of old discharged debts for $50,000 and potentially collect millions if they were aggressive enough, patient enough, and willing to pursue debtors through wage garnishment, asset seizure, and endless legal harassment. Between 2010 and 2023, An estimated 4.7 million Americans were pursued for debts they believed had been discharged in bankruptcy. Most of them paid. Some declared bankruptcy again, entering an endless cycle. Some simply gave up, letting their wages be garnished, their bank accounts frozen, their lives suspended in permanent financial limbo. The system worked because it was complex, too complex for ordinary people to understand. The average person who signed a personal guarantee didn't read the fine print about survival clauses and restructuring provisions. They trusted that if their lawyer said the debt was discharged, it was discharged. They trusted that bankruptcy meant a fresh start. They trusted that the system was designed to give people a second chance. But the system was designed to do something else entirely. It was designed to ensure that debt, once created, never truly died. It could be transferred, restructured, repackaged, and resurrected. It could follow you for decades. It could appear when you thought you were finally free, like a ghost, like a curse, like something out of a nightmare. Claire's parents hadn't known. When they signed the loan documents in 2009, they'd been desperate. The restaurant was failing. They'd invested their savings, their retirement, everything they had. They needed one more chance. Just one more. The bank required personal guarantees from family members. It was standard practice, the loan officer had said. Just a formality. Claire's father had died in 2016. Heart attack. He'd been 68. Her mother had died 2 years later. Cancer. Neither of them had known that the debt would come back. Neither of them had lived to see their daughters trapped by a signature they'd made in good faith 14 years earlier. Rachel called again 2 days later. She'd spoken to a lawyer, a bankruptcy lawyer. He'd explained that bankruptcy probably wouldn't help. The debt was structured in a way that might survive a second bankruptcy filing. And even if it didn't, the process would take months, cost thousands in legal fees, and destroy what was left of their credit for another decade. There was another option, the lawyer had said. They could fight it, challenge the validity of the debt, argue that the restructuring was fraudulent, that the survival clause was unenforceable, that the statute of limitations had expired. But it would require going to court, hiring expensive lawyers, taking on a firm that specialized in debt collection litigation, a firm that had teams of lawyers and unlimited resources and a success rate of over 90%. The lawyer's fee for taking the case would be $45,000. Up front, with no guarantee of success. Rachel couldn't pay it. Claire couldn't pay it. They couldn't pay anything. Rachel's voice on the phone was hollow. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know this could happen." Claire said nothing. There was nothing to say. Sorry didn't change anything. Sorry didn't make the debt disappear. Sorry was just a word. "What are we going to do?" Rachel asked. Her voice was small, childlike, the voice of someone who'd given up. Claire didn't answer. She was thinking. She'd been thinking for 2 days straight. Thinking through her shift at the hospital. Thinking while she showered. Thinking while she fed Tuesday. Thinking while she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She was thinking about systems, about how they worked, about their vulnerabilities. For 11 years, she'd operated within the system. She'd played by the rules. She'd made her payments. She'd sacrificed and struggled and suffered. And she'd believed that if she just worked hard enough, if she just endured long enough, she'd eventually be free. She'd believed in the fairness of the system, in the possibility of redemption through suffering. But the system wasn't fair. It had never been fair. It was designed to trap people, designed to ensure that once you fell into debt, you stayed in debt, designed to extract as much as possible from the vulnerable while protecting the powerful. Claire had spent 11 years being the good debtor, the responsible one, the one who paid. Maybe it was time to stop being good. The first thing Claire did was read. She spent 3 days reading everything she could find about debt collection law, personal guarantees, joint and several liability, survival clauses, statute of limitations, and debt buyer practices. She read legal journals. She read court cases. She read consumer protection statutes. She read everything. The second thing she did was request documentation. Under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, she had the right to request verification of the debt. Proof that she actually owed what they claimed she owed. Proof that the debt had been properly transferred. Proof that all the fees and interest charges were legitimate. She sent a certified letter to Callinger and Associates demanding full documentation. The third thing she did was unusual. She started looking for others. Other people who'd been pursued by Callinger and Associates. Other people who'd been hit with resurrected debts. She found online forums, support groups, Facebook communities, thousands of people, tens of thousands, all telling similar stories, all trapped by technicalities and fine print and legal loopholes. She started taking notes, names, amounts, dates, patterns. The documentation arrived 6 weeks later, 347 pages. Claire read every single page. She read them twice. Then she found something. A mistake, not a big mistake, a tiny mistake. On page 219, in the chain of title showing how the debt had been transferred from Mountain View Regional Bank to Consolidated Financial Group to CFG Recovery Trust, there was a gap, a 6-month gap between the bank failure and the asset purchase. During those 6 months, the debt had been unsecured, owned by no one, floating in legal limbo. And under Oregon state law, an unsecured debt from a failed institution that wasn't claimed within 180 days was considered abandoned, unenforceable. It was a technicality, a tiny, obscure technicality, the kind that law firms like Callinger and Associates usually caught, but they'd missed it. Or more likely, they'd gambled that no one would find it. Claire called Rachel. "Start documenting everything," she said. "Every phone call, every letter, every communication. Record dates, times, names. I need you to file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I need you to file a complaint with the Oregon Attorney General. I need you to do exactly what I tell you." Rachel's voice was uncertain. "What are you doing?" she asked. Claire was sitting at her kitchen table. Her laptop was open in front of her, surrounded by stacks of printed documents covered in highlighter marks and handwritten notes. Tuesday was asleep in her lap. Outside, rain was falling. It was always falling. "I'm fighting back," Claire said. She filed a lawsuit, not against Callinger and Associates directly. That would have been too expensive, too slow. Instead, she filed a complaint with the Oregon Department of Consumer and Business Services, alleging predatory debt collection practices. She attached the documentation showing the gap in the chain of title. She attached testimonials from 47 other Oregon residents who'd been pursued by the same firm for debts with similar irregularities. She attached a detailed legal analysis showing how the firm had systematically exploited loopholes while ignoring state consumer protection laws. Then she sent copies to the local news, to consumer rights organizations, to a legal aid nonprofit that specialized in debt defense, to a state senator who'd recently proposed legislation to reform debt collection practices. The story ran 3 weeks later. Local woman fights back against debt collection firm. It was a small story, page 7 of the business section, but it quoted Claire. It quoted the state senator. It mentioned the 47 other victims. It included a response from Callinger and Associates that was defensive and legalistic and made them sound exactly like what they were, predators. 2 more news outlets picked it up, then a local TV station, then a statewide investigative journalism nonprofit. The story grew. More victims came forward. The number went from 47 to 234, then to over 1,000. The Oregon Attorney General opened an investigation. Callinger and Associates tried to settle with Claire directly. "Drop the complaint," they said. "We'll discharge your debt. Full discharge. No payment necessary. Just sign the settlement agreement and make this go away." Claire said no. She wanted more than her debt discharged. She wanted the practice to end. She wanted the loophole closed. She wanted every single person who'd been trapped by this firm to be freed. The investigation took 9 months. During those 9 months, Claire kept working her night shifts at the hospital. kept living in her small apartment, kept feeding Tuesday, kept doing everything she'd always done. But now she also spent hours every week coordinating with other victims, speaking to reporters, meeting with lawyers from the Attorney General's office, documenting everything. Rachel helped. She was good at organizing, at keeping track of details, at making sure nothing fell through the cracks. They worked together the way they hadn't since they were kids, not as sisters divided by time and circumstance and their own separate struggles, but as a team, as people who'd been wronged and refused to accept it. The Attorney General's office found widespread violations, not just with Claire's debt, but with hundreds of others. Callinger and Associates had systematically pursued debts that were legally unenforceable. They'd used intimidation and false threats. They'd filed court documents with falsified chain of title information. They'd violated state and federal consumer protection laws in ways that were deliberate, systematic, and profitable. The settlement was announced on a Thursday in March. Callinger and Associates agreed to cease all debt collection activities in Oregon. They agreed to discharge every debt they'd been pursuing in the state, over 3,000 individual debts totaling $47 million. They agreed to pay a fine of $6.2 million to the state, and they agreed to never operate in Oregon again. Claire's debt was discharged. Rachel's debt was discharged. 3,000 other people's debts were discharged. The system that had trapped them was dismantled, at least in one small corner of one state. But Claire knew it wasn't really gone. Callinger and Associates still operated in 49 other states. Other firms like them operated everywhere. The laws that allowed this predatory practice were still on the books in most places. The loopholes were still there. The system was still designed to trap people in debt forever. She'd won her battle. She'd freed herself and her sister and 3,000 strangers. But the war was still being fought, and most people were still losing. On the morning after the settlement was announced, Claire made coffee in her chipped mug and sat on her old couch with Tuesday in her lap. She opened her laptop. Her debt balance showed zero. It had shown zero for 9 months technically, since the morning she'd made that final payment on the first debt. But this zero felt different. This zero was permanent. This zero couldn't be resurrected. She thought about those 11 years, the sacrifice, the struggle, the loneliness, the way she'd put her entire life on hold to be responsible, to be good, to follow the rules. And then, 9 hours after finally being free, the system had tried to trap her again. If she hadn't fought back, she'd be paying for the rest of her life. She'd never have taken that vacation to the coast. She'd never have started dating. She'd never have bought that new couch. She'd have spent another decade, maybe 2, trapped in the same cycle, working, paying, surviving, never living. The system didn't reward responsibility. It punished vulnerability. It waited for you to be tired, to be weak, to believe you were finally safe. And then it struck. Rachel called that afternoon. Her voice sounded different, lighter. There was something in it that hadn't been there in months. Something that sounded almost like hope. She'd gotten a job offer. Better pay, better hours. She was going to take it. She was going to start rebuilding. Claire said that was good. She meant it. But there was something cold in her chest that wouldn't go away. A knowledge, an understanding. They'd won this time. They'd been lucky and smart. And they'd found the one tiny mistake that had set them free. But most people weren't that lucky. Most people didn't find the mistake. Most people just paid or got crushed or gave up. The debt was paid. The battle was won. But something else had been lost in the process. Some fundamental trust. Some belief that if you just worked hard enough, if you just followed the rules, you'd eventually be okay. Claire had learned something in those 9 months of fighting. She'd learned that the system wasn't designed to let you win. It was designed to make winning so difficult, so expensive, so time-consuming that most people gave up before they even started. She'd learned that freedom wasn't earned through sacrifice and obedience. It was taken through knowledge and stubbornness and a willingness to fight when fighting seemed impossible. She'd paid the debt twice, once with 11 years of her life, once with 9 months of exhausting battle. Both times she'd given everything, and both times she'd barely escaped. Tuesday stretched in her lap, purring. Outside, the rain continued. It was always raining in Portland. Claire stared at her laptop screen, at that beautiful zero, and wondered how many people were out there right now, sitting in their own apartments, staring at their own debt balances, believing that if they just kept paying, if they just kept sacrificing, they'd eventually be free. She wondered how many of them would get the phone call. How many would find out, too late, that debt never really dies. It just waits. The settlement made the news for a week. Then people moved on to other stories, other crises. The world kept turning. Claire went back to her night shifts at the hospital, back to saving lives and watching people die and pretending that everything was normal. But she kept the documentation, all 347 pages, all her notes, all the testimonials from the other victims. She kept it in a box in her closet, along with the settlement agreement and the news articles and a list of names. Over 3,000 names. People who'd been freed because she'd fought back. Sometimes, late at night after her shift, she'd take out the box and look through it. She'd read the letters people had sent her. "Thank you. You saved my life. I don't know what I would have done. You gave me hope." She'd read them and feel something complicated and painful and impossible to name. Pride, maybe, or exhaustion, or the bitter knowledge that she shouldn't have had to fight at all. A year later, the state senator who'd helped with the investigation introduced new legislation, stronger consumer protections, limits on debt collection practices, requirements for documentation, prohibitions on pursuing debts with gaps in the chain of title. The bill passed. It became law. Oregon became one of the few states in the country with real protections against predatory debt collection. Claire was invited to the signing ceremony. She stood in the back of the room wearing the same nurse's scrub she'd worn to her shift that morning and watched the senator sign the bill into law. He mentioned her by name. He called her a hero. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. Rachel was there too. She'd brought her daughter, Claire's niece, who was 7 years old and didn't understand what any of this meant, but knew it was important because her mom had told her so. The girl held Claire's hand during the ceremony. Her hand was small and warm, and Claire held it tightly. After it was over, after the cameras left and the politicians moved on to their next event, Rachel and Claire stood outside the Capitol building in the cold February air. Rachel was crying. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you." Claire didn't know what to say. "You're welcome" seemed wrong. "It's okay" seemed like a lie. "I'm sorry you had to do this alone," Rachel said finally. "I should have fought too. I should have helped more. I was just so scared." Claire looked at her sister, really looked at her. Rachel had lost weight. Her hair had more gray in it. The lines around her eyes were deeper. They'd both aged 10 years in the last 18 months. Both paid a price that couldn't be measured in money. "You weren't alone," Claire said. And it was true. Rachel had helped. She'd organized, documented, coordinated. She'd been there. But Claire had been the one who'd refused to give up. The one who'd kept pushing when pushing seemed pointless. The one who'd turned rage into strategy and pain into power. Some battles, Claire thought, you have to fight yourself. Some things can't be delegated or shared or split between sisters. Some things you have to do alone, in the dark, while the rest of the world sleeps. They went to dinner after, just the three of them, Claire and Rachel's daughter. They went to a restaurant that was too expensive, that they couldn't really afford, that felt like a celebration and a funeral at the same time. Claire ordered wine. She never ordered wine. She'd spent 11 years not ordering wine, not ordering anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. The wine was red and dry and tasted like something she'd earned. Rachel's daughter asked what they were celebrating. Rachel looked at Claire. Claire looked at her wine. How do you explain this to a 7-year-old? How do you explain that sometimes the system that's supposed to protect you is the same system that tries to destroy you? How do you explain that freedom isn't free, that it costs everything, that even when you win, you lose something? We were in trouble, Claire said finally, but we got out. We helped each other get out, and now we're going to make sure other people can get out too. The girl nodded, satisfied with this answer. She went back to her chicken fingers. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed Claire's hand. They sat there in the expensive restaurant, eating food they couldn't afford, celebrating a victory that felt more like survival, and tried to pretend that everything was going to be okay now. But Claire knew better. She'd learned too much, seen too much. She knew that there were still predatory debt collectors operating in 49 other states. She knew that millions of people were still trapped. She knew that the system that had tried to destroy her was still out there, still hunting, still waiting for the next vulnerable person to fall into its trap. She'd won her battle. She'd freed herself and her sister, and 3,000 others. She'd changed the law in one state, but the war was still being fought, and most people were still losing. Claire went back to work, back to night shifts, back to emergency rooms and broken bodies and the constant hum of suffering. She saved lives. She held hands. She pronounced people dead. She did her job. But something had changed. She couldn't see the world the same way anymore. Every patient who came in with chest pains, she wondered if it was stress from debt. Every suicide attempt, she wondered if medical bills had been the final push. Every person who delayed care, who showed up only when things were desperate, she knew why. She knew what debt did to people, how it crushed them slowly, invisibly, until there was nothing left. She'd become the kind of person who noticed things, who saw patterns, who understood that the worst suffering was often the suffering no one could see, not the bleeding wounds or the broken bones, but the invisible weight people carried, the debt, the fear, the knowledge that one unexpected expense, one phone call, one letter in a yellow envelope could destroy everything. 2 years after the settlement, Claire received an email. It was from a woman in Michigan. She'd read about Claire's case. She was being pursued by a different debt collection firm for a different resurrected debt. She didn't know what to do. Could Claire help? Claire should have said no. She should have explained that she wasn't a lawyer, that she couldn't provide legal advice, that this wasn't her problem. But she remembered the 47 people who'd come forward when she'd needed them. The 234, the 3,000. She remembered what it felt like to be trapped with no way out. She said yes. That was how it started. One email, then another, then 50, then 500. People finding her, asking for help, sending their documentation, telling their stories. They'd been pursued for medical debt, student loans, credit cards, business loans, debts they'd inherited, debts they didn't know existed. All of them trapped by the same invisible system. All of them desperate for someone who understood. Claire couldn't help them all. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't an expert. She was just a night shift nurse who'd gotten angry enough to fight back. But she could point them to resources, consumer protection agencies, legal aid organizations, other people who'd fought similar battles. She could tell them what she'd learned, how to request documentation, how to find mistakes, how to fight back when fighting seemed impossible. She started a website. Nothing fancy. Just a place to share information, a list of resources, a forum where people could share their stories and strategies. It grew. People found it. They shared it. They added to it. It became something larger than she'd intended. Not just a resource, but a community. A place where people who'd been crushed by the system could find each other and remember that they weren't alone. Rachel helped. She managed the website, organized the resources, moderated the forum. It became their thing, their shared project, the thing that made sense of everything they'd been through. Claire never made back the 11 years. She never got that time back. She never got back the youth she'd spent trapped in debt, the relationships she'd never formed, the life she'd never lived. Some debts, she realized, could never be repaid. Some things, once taken, were gone forever. But she'd won. In her own way, on her own terms, she'd won. Not by playing by the rules, but by learning the rules well enough to break them. Not by being good, but by being smart and stubborn and angry enough to refuse to give up. The system had tried to trap her twice. Twice she'd escaped, and now she was helping others escape. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough, but it was something. On quiet nights at the hospital, during the hours between midnight and dawn when the emergency room was empty and the world was still, Claire sometimes thought about that phone call. The one at 9:47 p.m., the one from her sister, the one that had arrived 9 hours after she'd finally been free. If Rachel hadn't called, if the letter had never come, Claire would have spent the last few years living. Actually living. She'd have taken that vacation to the coast. She'd have dated. She'd have saved money. She'd have started her life. But she also wouldn't have learned what she learned. She wouldn't have fought back. She wouldn't have freed 3,000 people. She wouldn't have changed the law. She wouldn't have built something that might help millions of others escape the same trap. She couldn't decide if the trade was worth it. If 9 months of exhausting battle and 2 years of volunteer work helping strangers was worth more than the life she'd have lived if that phone had never rung. She couldn't decide if she'd won or if she'd just survived. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe the question itself was wrong. Claire was 45 years old now. She still worked night shifts. She still lived in the same small apartment with Tuesday, who was fat and old and slept 20 hours a day. She still made coffee in the same chipped mug. She still had the crack in the ceiling that looked like a river on a map. But the crack looked different now. Not like freedom. Like something else. A reminder. A scar. Evidence of a battle fought and won at terrible cost. The debt was paid. The law was changed. 3,000 people were free. And Claire had learned the most valuable and painful lesson of her life. That freedom isn't something the system gives you. It's something you have to take, knowing that even when you win, part of you stays trapped forever in the moment you were most afraid. She'd been finally debt-free until her sister called, and in the end, the call had cost her everything and given her everything, both at once, inseparable, like debt and freedom, like sacrifice and victory, like the system that crushes you and the rage that sets you free. There are 37 states where this still happens, where debt collection firms buy old debts and pursue them using loopholes in bankruptcy law, where personal guarantees survive discharge, where people who thought they were free discover years later that they're still trapped, where ordinary people are crushed by a system designed to extract profit from vulnerability. Claire's case changed things in Oregon, but Oregon is small, and the debt collection industry is large and powerful and patient. They've moved on to other states, other victims, other people who will receive phone calls at 9:47 p.m. on ordinary Tuesdays and discover that their freedom was always an illusion. Some of them will fight back. Most won't. Most will pay or give up or declare bankruptcy again or simply endure until there's nothing left to take. But a few, maybe, will find Claire's website, will read her story, will learn that they're not alone, will discover that the system has vulnerabilities, will get angry enough to fight back, and maybe, slowly, case by case, state by state, the system will change. Maybe the loopholes will close. Maybe the laws will improve. Maybe one day, debt will actually die when it's supposed to die, and people who've paid their dues will actually be free. Or maybe not. Maybe the system is too big, too powerful, too profitable to ever really change. Maybe all Claire did was save 3,000 people, while millions of others continue to drown. She doesn't know. She can't know. All she knows is that she fought when she could have given up. She won when she could have lost. And now, years later, she's still fighting, still helping, still refusing to accept that this is just how things are. The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and everything changed, but not in the way anyone expected, not in the way the system intended. Because sometimes, when you trap someone long enough, when you push them hard enough, they don't break. They learn. They adapt. They become something the system wasn't designed to handle. They become dangerous.